Paul is going to have more sports for us in a few minutes, but now it's time for another installment of our Stories of Service.
Yeah, you know, it's really been a thrill to meet each and every World War II veteran that I've come across the last couple of years, but I have to say this is one of the most incredible stories so far. I mean that. From hobo to pilot to bombardier to prisoner of war, Merced's Pete Komlenich has lived one remarkable life.
In 1991, you know, I thought 1991 had a meaning for me. It came out like any other year.
Because for a year and a half, you were 1991.
That's right.
Yes, Pete Komlenich spent 18 hungry months as prisoner of war number 1991. But if we start there, we'll miss some of his story's most remarkable twists and turns.
I escaped from Chicago when I was about 16. I rode the rails for about 2 years.
He says he never took a dime for wages. A hot meal was satisfaction enough. Pete began his journey from hobo to hero by posing as his younger brother.
He was missing in action. He was a Marine paratrooper. We didn't know where he was for about 6 months. I took his birth certificate and got in the old Army Air Corps as a pilot.
They believed you were your brother. You were using his name?
They had, the birth certificate was in a Montenegrin language. And the names were similar. He still spells his name with a K-O-M-N-E, and I spell mine K-O-M-L, because the L looks like an N in a Montenegrin language.
Near the end of pilot training, both of Pete's eardrums ruptured. After he recovered, the Air Corps turned him into a bombardier on a B-24 Liberator, assigned to the 376th Bomb Group in North Africa.
Now the Tuskegee Flyers, they're the ones that kept us pretty safe. When we saw the red tails out there, we felt pretty safe.
They were your escorts?
Most of the time, yeah. Called them red-tailed angels.
Pete remains grateful to the pioneering African-American pilots who protected his plane on bombing runs. But there weren't any of those red-tailed P-51s around for his 13th mission.
We aborted the day before because of weather. And next day we took off. They roused us, said, you know, everything the same, no briefing, just take off. They forgot to tell it the Tuskegee Flyers were airborne. And word got to all the fighter bases. You know, the Germans had spies all over the area. There's no fighter escort. So every airplane available the Germans had hit us, about 150 of them. We lost my squadron in less than 10 minutes. We were the first ones to get hit. Number 3 engine was shot out, and the bomb bays were hit. And the engineer was still firing his guns with the turret shot off of him. The waist gunner, he got his eye knocked out from a ricocheted pellet, and he was hanging, and he tore it off and kept firing.
And you realize no one's flying your plane?
I'm calling out fighters, and no response. So I looked up, no pilots, no one there, but he didn't ring the alarm bell.
They had bailed out and not told anybody?
That's right. And there was 3 of us in the nose of that airplane.
But not for long. They knew they needed to bail out. What Pete didn't know was that someone had stepped on his oxygen hose. He says he passed out shortly after struggling to open the escape hatch.
During that time, just before I went out that escape hatch, I could hear my bride, just like you and I are talking, just Pete, 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 about 8 times. And that's all I remember until the good Lord opened my chute, because I didn't.
When Pete came to, he was floating down toward Italy, and he had company.
I still had my oxygen mask on, and there were 2 ME-109s flying along, waving their wings like, hey, buddy, so long.
At least they didn't shoot you.
Well, we were told that that's what they were doing, but they didn't do that. They were kind of chivalrous.
That chivalry would end not long after Pete hit the ground. His wounds were treated and shrapnel removed from his arm, but then he was taken to the infamous interrogation center known as Dulag Luft.
They had one entrance for bombardiers and Jewish American flying officers. They were executing him. And that's why we're trying to, see, I had nothing on to show that I was a bombardier, but maybe evidently one of my crew members must have told them that I was the bombardier. And they were trying to prove this. I was in a little place about just like a doghouse. And twice a day, they'd come and get me and interrogate me. And when I told him the name, rank, and serial number, you know, about the 100th time, that's when I told you he hit me in the mouth and knocked my teeth in. It was all bloodied. And I wouldn't let him take me to the doctor anywhere. And I couldn't speak now. So they finally let me go. They figured they had enough people to worry about.
When he says they let him go, he means they stuffed him into a 40-8 boxcar and sent him to Stalag Luft 1, where he'd spend the next year and a half as a prisoner of war, his 138-pound bombardier body wasting away to just 91 pounds.
And this is the North Sea here and our escape routes.
That escape map was drawn on silk from a British Royal Air Force boot. He was carrying one just like it the day he got in a fight with a Nazi guard.
And he grabbed me by the neck and he was hauling me towards the cooler. Remember, I gave him a karate chop then. I didn't know what a karate chop was at the time, and I knew I made a mistake. And I just remember I had one of the escape maps in my collar of that raft jacket. And I know they would tear that jacket apart. I went to the latrine, and they had a little knife, and I cut that out, and I threw it in the latrine. Was one of these with a water tower on top. And I pulled the chain, and that damn thing was still floating around in there. And the guards were howling, we come out of there, and I wrapped the little stone in there and put it in and flushed it and went down the drain. Because when I got my raft jacket back a day later, it was all torn up.
Just another close call in a life littered with them. He cherishes that map and the bombardier wings he crafted out of English bully beef cans.
I used to take the can and melt the lead and pour it. I had my own cord I'd make. And the Germans never discovered I had it in with our larder,
Stalag Luft 1 was liberated in April of 1945, and after Pete recovered from his severe weight loss, it was back to Air Force duty. He didn't retire as a colonel until 1970, so he has plenty more stories to tell, like being a bombardier on a nuclear-armed B-52 at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. In the air, bound for Russia, his first target was the Kremlin. While he takes some pride in his decorations, including the Distinguished Flying Cross, even a short conversation with Pete will show you he's most proud of being an American. He's lived a charmed life, he says, and he's determined to share his blessings with others.
I've got a lot of paying back to do to this world for all the angels I had on my shoulder.
Wow, that is amazing. He's like a cat with 9 lives.
Yeah, and one of the ways that he gives back, he's talking about, he buys jackets and food for homeless people. He was a hobo for 2 years, so that's near and dear to his heart. You want to guess how old he is?
80?
93.
Ooh.
Going to be 94 in July. Pete, thank you for sharing your story with us. And if any of you at home would like